At 6:42 a.m., my wife texted, "Plans changed. You're not coming on the cruise. Emily wants her real dad." I stared at my phone in disbelief. By noon, I'd made a call that would change everything. 1 week later, they came home. "My name is Mark Halverson. I'm 54 years old. Worked in auto sales in Davenport, Iowa for 30 years. This is the story of how one text message taught me the difference between being family and being used." At 6:42 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, my phone buzzed on the kitchen table. I was standing at the counter, waiting for the coffee pot to finish its cycle. The AM radio mumbled a farm report out of Cedar Rapids. Outside, the maple tree by the driveway shook in the morning wind, leaves skittering across the concrete like they were trying to escape. I picked up the phone. A text from Linda, my wife of 14 years. "Plans changed. You're not coming on the cruise. Emily wants her real dad." I read it once, then again. Same words, same punctuation, same calm cruelty. Linda had sent it like she was canceling a dentist appointment. I didn't reply. I set the phone face down on the table and watched it vibrate again. Another message trying to claw its way through the wood. I didn't pick it up. I sat down instead, in the chair at the head of the table. The chair I'd always taken without thinking. The one that faced the window. The one Linda used to call your spot. The coffee went cold. I didn't notice. 14 years earlier, I'd moved into this house on East Locust Street with a couch, a toolbox, and a promise I meant to keep. Emily was 12 then, skinny kid, braces, eyes always watching. Her real dad, Rick Donnelly, had been gone more than he'd been around. Linda told me that the first night we sat on the back steps, with beers sweating in our hands. "It's just us," she'd said. "We're a family now." We're a family. She said it a lot over the years. Whenever money came up, especially when I paid for Emily's braces, Linda squeezed my arm and said, "Your money is our money." When I dipped into savings for Emily's used Honda after she got into Iowa State, Linda said, "This is what dads do." When I set up the auto debit for the cruise, the Mississippi River anniversary trip she'd been hinting at for months, Linda kissed my cheek and said, "We deserve this." We. But the text didn't say we. It said, her real dad. The phone vibrated again. I stood finally and walked to the sink. I poured the coffee out without tasting it. The mug clinked hard against the porcelain, like it was mad at me for wasting it. When I picked the phone up this time, it wasn't another text. It was a voicemail notification. Linda's voice. I knew before I hit play. Tight, fast, already annoyed. "Mark, don't make this into a thing. Emily asked for this. You understand, right? Call me when you've calmed down." Calm down. I leaned my hip against the counter and closed my eyes. I saw Emily at 12, sitting at this same table with her math homework spread out, crying because Rick hadn't shown up again. I remembered pulling out the chair next to her, not the head chair, and saying, "Okay, kiddo, let's do this together." I remembered the way she'd smiled then, crooked and relieved, like she'd been holding her breath. I played the voicemail again. Linda's voice sounded practiced the second time, like she'd rehearsed it in her head before calling. I didn't call back. By 9:30, I was supposed to be on the road to Dubuque for a dealership visit. I put on my jacket, grabbed my keys, and stopped in the hallway where the family photos hung. There was one from the year we refinanced, Linda and Emily on the couch, me standing just off to the side, hand on the back cushion, like I wasn't sure I belonged in the frame. I'd never noticed that before. At the dealership, I shook hands, talked numbers, nodded at the right times. I missed a question and had to ask them to repeat it. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I ignored it. It buzzed again, and again. On the drive back, I pulled into a gas station and sat in the truck with the engine idling. I listened to the phone ring until it stopped. The silence afterward felt heavy, like a door closing somewhere I couldn't reach. I thought about calling my buddy from the VFW. I thought about calling my sister. I thought about calling Rick Donnelly and asking him what the hell he thought he was doing, stepping back into my life like a guest who'd finally noticed the bill. Instead, I drove home. The house was too quiet. Linda had left early for the airport, so the bed was made tight and flat like a hotel room. I sat at the table again, in that head chair, and looked at the empty place settings. I imagined Linda and Emily on the cruise deck, wind in their hair, Rick leaning on the railing like he'd earned the view. My phone buzzed one more time, a text from Emily this time. "Please respect our space." I stared at it until the letters blurred. I set the phone down. I didn't throw it. I didn't swear. I just turned it face down and pushed it a few inches away, like you do with something hot you don't want to touch anymore. The AM radio clicked to the news. A story about river levels, about boats, about departures and returns. I sat there longer than I meant to, listening, breathing, letting the hurt settle into something heavier and steadier. Something that wasn't yelling. Something that didn't need to be. That was the moment it stopped being about the cruise. That was the moment I understood that this wasn't a misunderstanding or a bad morning. It was a line being drawn, one they'd been inching toward for years while I paid the bills and smiled for photos. I stood up, took the chair at the head of the table, and pushed it in under the table like I was clearing a space. Then I picked up my phone and turned off the notifications. I didn't sleep much that night. Not the tossing and turning kind, just the kind where your eyes are closed, but your brain keeps walking in circles. Every time I drifted off, that line came back. Her real family. It sat there like grit under a contact lens, small but impossible to ignore. At 5:30, I gave up. I shaved, dressed, and made coffee again. This time I drank it standing up. The house felt different in the early morning light, like it was waiting for instructions. I checked my phone out of habit. 3 missed calls from Linda. 2 voicemails. I didn't listen. On the drive to work, I thought about the word family. The way some people think about interest rates. Something you can't argue with, only prepare for. At the office, I lasted until 10 a.m. before my hands started to shake. I told my assistant I needed to step out and drove straight to Davenport Community Credit Union. I'd been banking there since before Linda, before Emily, before all of this. Same parking lot, same squeaky door. The woman at the counter, Susan, according to her badge, smiled like she always did. "Morning, Mark. What can I help you with?" "I need to look at my accounts," I said. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. She pulled everything up without fuss. Checking, savings, the auto debits. I watched the screen scroll. Mortgage, utilities, insurance. And there it was, the cruise payment, scheduled like clockwork. All in my name. Susan glanced at me. "Everything okay?" I nodded. "Just making sure." I went back to my truck and sat there with the printouts on my lap. The paper smelled faintly of toner and coffee. I stared at the numbers until they started to feel less like an accusation and more like information. Cold. Useful. That night, instead of going home right away, I pulled into the VFW post on West 3rd Street. The parking lot was half full. Inside, the lights were low and the air smelled like fried onions and old stories. I ordered a beer and sat at the end of the bar. Walt Prendergast slid onto the stool next to me without asking. 80 years old if he was a day, navy cap worn soft as felt. He looked at me sideways. "You look like hell." Feel worse, I answered. I didn't tell him everything, just enough. The text, the cruise, the way it landed. Walt took a sip and nodded once. People don't change. They just get more honest when they think they've won. I stared into my beer. I don't want to blow things up. He set his glass down. Then don't. Build yourself something new. Somewhere they don't have a key. That stuck with me. At home, I opened the filing cabinet in the spare room. It was one of those metal ones that screeches when you pull the drawer too fast. Inside were years of receipts and folders I'd kept, because that's what my dad taught me to do. I found the braces paperwork first. Emily's name. My signature. I found the invoice from the mechanic when her Honda needed a transmission. The checks for the college fund, small amounts, steady, years long. I remembered skipping lunches to make those deposits. Linda had always said it was sweet, necessary. We're a family. Then I found something newer. Transfers I didn't recognize at first. Small amounts, regular. Linda moving money into an account with Emily's name on it. Not illegal, not huge, but hidden, quiet. I sat back in the chair and laughed once, short and surprised. It wasn't anger yet. It was clarity. My phone buzzed on the desk. I ignored it. It buzzed again. I flipped it over and watched the screen light up, then go dark. The next morning, I called the cruise line. The woman on the phone was polite and uncurious. Reason for cancellation? I'm no longer a passenger, I said. In more ways than one. She processed it without comment. That afternoon, I called an attorney recommended by the credit union. We met the next day. He was younger than I expected, tie loose, desk cluttered with files. House is titled solely in your name, he said after a quick review. You can sell. What about my wife? I asked. She lives there, he said. That's not the same thing. I drove home slow. I sat at the table again, in that head chair, and spread the papers out. The phone lay face down beside them, silent now. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was tired. And for the first time, sure. Sure that what I'd been calling patience was really permission. I gathered the folders, stacked them neatly, and slid the chair back in under the table. Tomorrow, I'd make a call. I waited a full day before making the call. Not because I was unsure, but because I needed to hear my own thoughts without Linda's voice climbing over them. Silence does that. It gives you room to see what you've been avoiding. The realtor answered on the second ring. Her name was Karen Whitfield, based out of Bettendorf. I'd met her once years ago at a neighborhood barbecue. I'm thinking of selling, I said. She didn't ask why. She just asked for the address. We walked through the house 2 days later. I kept my hands in my pockets while she took notes, tapping walls, checking windows. The place looked smaller than I remembered, like it had already started letting go of me. Your wife knows? She asked carefully. She's traveling, I said. I'll handle it. Karen nodded. We can move fast if you want. But just so you know, if she contests it, it could get loud. I'm used to loud, I said. I'm done with noise. That night, my phone rang while I was packing a box of old work shirts. Linda's name lit up the screen. I didn't answer. It rang again. Then again. The vibration walked the phone across the dresser like it was trying to escape. A voicemail came in, then another. I listened to one. Her voice had shifted from annoyance to something sharper. Mark, stop this. You're embarrassing me. Rick's right here. He thinks you're overreacting. Rick. Of course he was. I deleted the message and turned the phone off. The offer came quicker than I expected. A young couple, Ben and Alyssa Morales, stationed at Rock Island Arsenal. First baby on the way. VA loan pre-approved. They needed to move before the end of the month. Karen hesitated. They're asking for a little off the price. I thought about the dining table, the head chair, the way I'd always slid it back in when things got tense. Tell them yes, I said. Signing day was quiet. Just me, the title agent, and the hum of the fluorescent lights. My hand shook once when I signed the last page. Then it didn't. As I stood to leave, my phone buzzed back to life. A text from Emily. Dad Mark, please don't do anything drastic. I stared at it for a long time. Then I typed back, I'm doing what I should have done a long time ago. I packed the truck that night. Only what mattered. I left the rest exactly where it was. When I pulled out of the driveway before dawn, the house looked the same as it always had. Solid, quiet, already belonging to someone else. They were somewhere on the river, raising a glass. I was driving west, watching the sun come up, finally breathing again. They came back on a Tuesday. I know because Karen texted me at 3:18 p.m. with 3 words and no punctuation. They're there now. I was sitting in a diner just outside Muscatine, a place with vinyl booths and coffee that tasted like it had been thinking about being coffee once. I didn't respond right away. I set the phone down, folded my hands, and stared at the napkin dispenser like it might explain something. Then I picked the phone up and waited. Linda was the first to call. I didn't answer. 5 minutes later, Emily. I didn't answer that either. Karen filled in the rest later, piece by piece, her voice calm in that realtor way that sounds like she's describing weather damage instead of a life coming apart. Linda had pulled into the driveway, laughing, suitcase still in the trunk. Emily was behind her, sunglasses on, phone in hand. They both thought it was funny at first. Some car they didn't recognize, lawn trimmed differently, a new planter by the door. Then Linda tried the key. Karen said she rattled the knob hard, like she thought the lock might apologize and open out of embarrassment. When the door didn't budge, Linda stepped back and stared at the house like it had personally betrayed her. She called my name out loud. Then she started dialing. Inside, Ben Morales opened the door halfway, chain still on. He was polite, apologetic even. Told her they'd just moved in that morning. Gave his name. Asked if he could help. Linda laughed. A short, sharp sound. Told him he was in her house. Ben asked her what she meant. That's when Linda started yelling. Alyssa came up behind him, one hand on her stomach. Emily stood frozen on the walkway, phone down now, face pale. Karen said it was the silence that got to her the most, that half-second when Emily looked around like someone waiting for a punch. The police came. 2 officers, one older guy who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Paperwork was shown. Names were read. Dates were checked. The older officer turned to Linda and said, "Ma'am, whose name is on the deed?" Karen told me Linda didn't answer right away. That pause, that was when it landed. Linda called me again. I answered on the 4th ring. "Mark," she said, breathless. "What did you do?" I leaned back in the booth and looked out at the parking lot. A semi rolled past. Somewhere a car alarm chirped and stopped. "I sold the house," I said. "You can't do that," she snapped. "That's our home." "It was my house," I said. "You just lived in it." She started talking fast then. Threats. Court. How dare I? How Rick would never have done this. Rick. Emily came on the line after that. She didn't yell. That almost hurt more. "I didn't think you'd really do it," she said. Her voice cracked on the word really. "I didn't think you'd really mean what you said," I replied. I kept my voice steady. It took effort. But here we are. There was a long pause. I could hear Linda in the background saying my name like it was a bad word. "I raised you," I said finally. "I didn't rent a place in your life." Emily didn't answer. The call ended. I finished my coffee. It tasted bitter now. That night, I sat alone in the small rental I'd lined up, a place near the river. Nothing fancy. I unfolded the card Ben and Alyssa had left in my mailbox. A thank you note. A picture of their ultrasound tucked inside. I sat at the little table and imagined the old dining room, the head chair, the place where I used to sit and try to keep things together. For the first time, the chair was empty, and it didn't feel like a loss. They filed the complaint a week later. Not divorce, at least not yet. Linda went after the house first, like she could rewind time if she yelled loudly enough in the right room. I got served at the rental on a Friday afternoon. The paper was stiff and official, my name spelled correctly for once. Scott County Courthouse smelled like old books and disinfectant. The kind of place where voices drop without anyone asking. I wore the same blazer I'd worn to church funerals and dealership dinners. Nothing fancy, just clean. I carried a manila envelope tucked under my arm, heavy with paper and memory. Linda arrived 10 minutes late, heels clicking too loud on the tile. Emily followed her, eyes down, purse clutched like a shield. Rick Donnelly trailed behind them, hands in his pockets, smile too easy for the room he was in. The mediator, a woman in her 60s with reading glasses hanging on a chain, looked over the file and sighed once. "Let's keep this simple," she said. "We're here to discuss property." Linda jumped in before I could sit. "He abandoned us," she said, pointing at me like I was a stain. "He sold our home out from under us. My daughter was humiliated." The mediator held up a hand. "Mr. Halverson, you'll have a chance." I waited. That was the hardest part, letting the words pile up without interrupting. Linda talked about sacrifice, about family, about how I'd always promised to take care of them. Rick nodded along like he'd been there for any of it. When the mediator finally turned to me, I stood and placed the envelope on the table. It made a soft, solid sound when it landed. "I didn't abandon anyone," I said. My voice surprised me. Calm, even. I stopped paying for a life I wasn't allowed to be part of. I opened the envelope and slid the documents forward. The deed, the mortgage statements, the cruise receipts, the auto-debit confirmations, dates circled in pen. Linda scoffed. "Money isn't everything." "You said it was when it was mine," I replied. The mediator adjusted her glasses and read. She didn't rush. That helped. She looked up at Linda. The property was solely titled in Mr. Halverson's name. "That's not fair," Linda said. "We were married." "Yes," the mediator said, "but marriage doesn't change ownership records by itself." Rick leaned forward then. "I'm her father. Emily deserved that house." I looked at him for the first time since walking in. Same grin he'd had at the barbecue years ago when he'd borrowed money and promised to pay it back. "You mean like she deserved child support?" I asked. The room went quiet. Rick's smile faltered. "I've got the receipts for that, too," I said, tapping the envelope. "Insurance gaps, tuition shortfalls, emergency repairs, things you missed." Emily finally looked up. Her eyes were wet, but there was something else there, too. Recognition. The mediator cleared her throat. "This isn't about feelings. Legally speaking, Mr. Halverson acted within his rights." Linda's face flushed. "So he just gets away with it?" I met her eyes. "I didn't get away. I paid for 14 years. No one clapped, no gavel slammed. But something shifted all the same. Linda slumped back in her chair. Rick leaned away from the table. Emily stared at her hands. The mediator closed the file. There's no standing here to challenge the sale. We're done. Outside, the sun was bright on the courthouse steps. I stood there a moment, breathing in air that felt earned. Emily came out last. She stopped a few feet away. "I didn't know about all of it," she said quietly. "I know," I replied. "And I did. But knowing now matters." She nodded once. Didn't hug me. Didn't apologize. Not yet. I walked to my truck alone, the envelope lighter than it had been going in. The river was low that fall, the kind of low where the rocks show their backs, and the water slides around them instead of over. I learned that sitting on the bank most mornings with a thermos and a cheap folding chair, watching the Mississippi wake up the same way I did, slow, honest, without apology. The rental was small, 1 bedroom, a table just big enough for 2, though it was usually just me. The radio worked if you turned the dial just right. I liked that. Things that require a little patience tend to tell you the truth. I didn't hear from Linda for weeks. When I did, it was a short email about mail forwarding and a bill she thought I still owed. I forwarded it to my attorney and let it go. No reply, no explanation. Silence had become a tool I knew how to use without hurting myself. Emily texted once in October. One line, "Can we talk sometime?" I stared at it longer than I meant to. I thought about the night she'd sat at the kitchen table with her homework spread out, the way she leaned her head against my shoulder when the numbers didn't make sense. "We can talk," I wrote back, "when you're ready to listen, too." We met at a coffee shop halfway between our places. Neutral ground. She looked older than I remembered, tired maybe, or just awake. "I didn't know about the money," she said after a while. "About the bills you paid. Mom didn't tell me." "I wasn't keeping score," I said. "I was keeping promises." She nodded, eyes down. I shouldn't have said what I said. I didn't rush to fix it. I didn't pat her hand or say it was okay. I just let the words sit between us until they softened on their own. "I'm not asking to go back," she added. "I just didn't realize what it cost you." "That's the thing about costs," I said. "You don't feel them if someone else is paying." We finished our coffee. We hugged, awkward and brief, like people learning a new way to stand in the same room. It wasn't a happy ending. It was an honest one. I could live with that. On Thursdays, I started stopping by the VFW again. Walt was there most nights. Same stool, same beer. One evening, he looked at me and nodded toward the river outside. "You look lighter," he said. "I am," I answered. "Turns out silence weighs less than pretending." He smiled at that, just a corner of his mouth. Winter came early. The river went steel gray. I bought a thicker coat and learned how to cook for one without burning everything. I slept better. Not longer, just deeper. Some nights I thought about the house on East Locust Street, about the dining table, the head chair, about how I used to slide it back in, always careful not to take up too much space. I don't do that anymore. What I learned, what took me 14 years and one quiet text message to understand, is this: love without respect is just labor, and silence, when it's chosen, can be a kind of strength. If you've ever been quietly erased, told you belonged right up until you didn't, I hope this story reminds you that dignity isn't loud, and justice doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just signs the papers, packs the truck, and keeps going. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe.